Hey class, I want to talk to you today about research designs. Bear in mind that all of this is geared toward behavior, so try to relate it to that. I won't be doing much of that for you. What I'm going to talk to you about is going to impart that. So I may stop a few times during this little lecturette and point some things out, but mostly I'm just going to present the material straightforward because it is straightforward stuff. And what we're talking about is research designs. And much of the time, many times, I guess, in psychology, we use animals, at least in the beginning, for various reasons. And it's ethical. They're protected. We don't mistreat our animals, our little uh, our little rats and mice and whatever else it is that you're working with, little monkeys. We treat them with respect and we take care of them. So this doesn't do any harm to them. Uh, and then if things work out as we hope, then we uh, change the research over to the use of people, providing that that's ethically and morally acceptable. Particularly ethically, not that morals aren't important, but you can't violate somebody's well-being, can't do harm. It's kind of like the Hippocratic Oath for medical doctors. We also have an oath to do no harm. Okay, so let's get into this. Research designs. Let's start with descriptive research. Descriptive research involves gathering information about a behavior and the circumstances which it occurs in. You do not manipulate any of the variables in descriptive research. That we'll get into that later. The variables, and I'll tell you what the variables are in a few minutes. The variables are left untouched. So this is more of a survey approach. Individuals answer questions. This works in qualitative research, by the way. Qualitative versus quantitative. Quantitative meaning numerical measurements. Qualitative meaning the study of emotional reaction. My area is qualitative. I like the aspect of human emotion. So we're doing a more qualitative approach, if you want to stretch it that far, in descriptive methods. The survey approach. What does this make you feel like, kind of thing. And the case study approach. My dissertation was a case study. Okay, and I won't go deeply into that. Case studies are one subject and you study them. And then there's a comparative aspect to that. So a case study means that you're doing something very intensively. Study of a single individual, whether it's an animal or a person. Maybe you're studying somebody with a rare disorder. I studied a girl, did a research project on a girl who had unresolved grand mal seizures, and she had been to all the major areas you can go to: Duke, Wake Forest, some outstanding clinics in Mecklenburg County, Charlotte area. Nobody could ever find out what was causing those seizures, and now she's a grown woman. She's perfectly fine. This happened to her when she was a young child up through part of her teenage years. Very intense study. The descriptive method is most relevant to behavioral research. And it is naturalistic observation. You systematically observe and record the occurrence of a behavior in its natural environment. And the important working word here is systematic. We systematically do this. You're not talking about casual observation. That leads to bias on the part of the researcher. You have preconceptions. You will learn a word in research called epoche, French word. It means remove myself, in essence. In other words, set your biases aside. You can't do biased research. It won't be accepted and you'll be kicked out of the industry, basically, so to speak. So you have to guard against doing research, and really any research for that matter, against these predeterminations, these preconceptions. Uh, your your job, if you're studying behavior, is in fact that you are studying behavior in specific circumstances. That's the whole nature of the project that you're doing. And you have preconceptions about what that behavior might be or should be or could be. That's what you have to dismiss. You have to minimize your biases. You have to define the variables precisely and then in a consistent way make your observations and do that in a uniform manner. So you're using the scientific method here. Naturalistic observation is used in zoology, for example, in a I don't know if you'd call it a discipline, an area of which is called ethology, and it's changed names. It's called behavioral ecology. It's a branch of zoology that focuses on the study of inherited behavior patterns in animals. What does that tell you? It talks to you about adaptation, not Darwinism, but adaptation. Because we do, in fact, adapt to our situations in a lot of ways. Let's say you grew up in a house where they kept the temperature at 73 degrees, and you move in with a roommate and they keep it on 68, and this is winter time, by the way. And you're not adapted to that. Hopefully, within several months, you will have become adapted to 68 degrees. Not always the case, but I'm using this as a made up situation. So we do adapt. We adapt physically, we adapt mentally. And what's viewed, adaptation is viewed as uh, a an evolution to help people, animals cope with aspects of the natural environment that you find yourself in, whether human or animal. Inherited behavioral patterns are usually better studied within the natural environment, or as close of approximation to it as you can get. Behavior may not occur uh, in an animal or a person for that matter if you remove them from the natural environment. If you set up a lab situation, and this is inherent in any research, you have to make sure if you're doing a study in a lab setting that you come as close to natural environmental stuff as you can. Sometimes you can't. So you have to make other arrangements. And I won't go really deeply into that. You want to do this not only when you're studying people, but animals, but also when you're studying people. What it leads to is detailed information about a behavior and the circumstances within which it typically occurs. The main problem with the approach is that it often leaves uncertainty as to which variables affect the occurrence of behavior. In other words, it's difficult to determine cause and effect, sometimes called functional relationships. Let's give you an example. Textbook points this out even. If you studied childhood aggression, and this study has been done, by the way, this is not something that was pulled out of the air. If you study childhood aggression by observing children interacting on a playground, you may see displays of aggressive behavior. Let me tell you something. I taught kindergarten through fifth grade when my very first teaching job in Florida after I graduated from the University of Florida was teaching kindergarten through fifth grade. I'm going to tell you, that's why I have no hair now. It was incredible. It was constantly refereeing and stopping fights. more stopping than refereeing. So children are naturally aggressive for the most part. Not all of them, but a good majority of them are. And then there are other studies have been done related to aggression and playing violent video games, etc. But what the point of this is, because you're observing them interacting on the playground in aggressive ways, it's difficult to determine why those aggressive behaviors are occurring. So you look at things like the child's history. Do they have a long history? Obviously, they're young, it can't be that long, but it doesn't have to be that long to have an effect. Do they have a history of aggression? Or are they going through a very frustrating day? Something's not going right in their learning division in the classroom, or you pick the problem. It all applies. Maybe in their home life there's a lot of violence, which is not uncommon. So the natural environment uh, brings with it this vastness of variables. What you're trying to determine in your research is which variables are responsible for which behavior. So the naturalistic observation approach is sometimes insufficient for gaining a total understanding of the behavior and the variables that are the background influences. Tough to do. Let's move to experimental research. Naturalistic observations give us detailed information about behavior, but they don't allow you to draw really good conclusions about the causes. So in order to get to those reasons and draw good conclusions, you have to conduct an experiment. So we've been talking about naturalistic observation or natural environment, if you want to call it that, observation. Now we're going to do an experiment. So in an effort to discover functional relationships between environmental events and behavior, most researchers prefer the experimental approach to research. And what is that? This is what you're familiar with. You're familiar with experimental research because if you've had any science classes in your past, then this is what they talked to you about. Dependent and independent variables. Does that ring a bell? In experimental research, you have one or several independent variables that are systematically varied to determine the effect on a dependent variable. I'll give you an example in a minute. The behavior you suspect will change as a result of changes in the independent variable. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to change something and see what happens. That's a simple way of putting it. Any differences in behavior across different conditions of the experiment are presumed to be caused by the differences in the independent variable. In other words, I was trying to speak before I got the word formed. I'm going to change something, and I'm going to see what the effect of changing that is. And I'm going to do also an accompanying control group with the experimental group, so I have something to base this against. A behavioral researcher will use two main types of experimental designs: group designs and single subject designs. So, and I know this has got to be familiar for you if you've had a science class or two. Each type of design has advantages and disadvantages. So we got to pick out the one that we feel like best fits the example, the experimental group. If it's a group, then obviously there's more than one, right? So we want to employ several methods. One method or whatever, one being with one having an association with the nature of the issue that we're trying to investigate. I hope that didn't confuse you. Well, let's get into the teeth of it and see what the gist of it and see what we're talking about here. Group designs. It's a little complicated, all right? Then this is the most common type of experimental design, group design. Researchers manipulate one or more independent variables across groups of subjects. So you have a control group and you have an experimental group. This is what you've heard before, I'm sure. A simple control group. Individuals are just randomly picked and assigned to a group, or they're assigned to the experimental group, or if you want to call it the treatment group. The experimental group is the group that's exposed to the manipulation, and the control group isn't. So the control group is your measurement against group, if you want to say it that way. Now, there are some more complications that you need to be aware of. If I want to, excuse me, I can have a simple control group, and that's going to give me simple results. I need to get it a little more complicated than that, a little more forthcoming, if you want to say that, with results. So I may use a factorial design. And in a factorial design, I'm going to examine the effects of two or more independent variables across groups of subjects. Now, let's use this crazy example, and I picked this from your text, from others, that I think really illustrates this because it's simplistic, but yet it gets across the complication of what you're dealing with here. I think your book uses animals. I changed around a little bit of the stuff to make it fit humans, since we're not in zoology, we're in psychology. So I want to know what the damaging effects of free food on ability to learn are, dependent on the age in humans. You really wouldn't be able to use this, by the way, ethically on humans unless you changed quite a few of the things here. You couldn't deprive them of food, for example. But let's pretend we can. So I have 20 humans that are randomly assigned, goodness, to one of the other groups, either the experimental group or the control group. Got that? People in the experimental group are placed individually in a closed room for 30 minutes. And during that time, they receive a free snack every minute. Wow. A lot of food, right? The people in the control group are treated exactly the same way, but they don't get any food in the 30 minutes that they're individually placed in the room. They can walk around and explore the room, but they don't get any food. So each person in each group gets one session per day for 10 consecutive days. Now on day 11, we change something. Here's manipulation of independent variable, right? On day 11, we put this lever in the room. And the people, obviously curiosity is going to play a role. They learn that if they press that lever, it delivers a snack. So the question that's being brought forth is, the people that had previously received free food, will they learn to press the lever more readily or less readily than the people that didn't receive free food? So the independent variable, having a hard time speaking today, y'all. The independent variable in this experiment is either the presence or absence of free food during the initial phase. So when they first go through this, is their food available to them, i.e. the experimental group, or is it not, the control group? And then the dependent variable is the average amount of time it takes for the people in each group to learn to press the lever for food. So do you get it? Once the lever is placed in the room, no longer are we just arbitrarily giving them the snack. Now they have to do something to get the snack. And you run this, you can do this with let's pretend we're talking about people here, but you can do it with animals too. Elderly people / animals, middle-aged people / animals, or young people. And that, by the way, using that is called a 2x3 factorial design. There are two independent variables, food and age, right? You get that? So we have a level. First, the first level, the first variable, I'm sorry, has two levels, free food versus no food. The second has three levels, old age versus middle age versus young age. So you see how the complication begins? You got six groups: old with free food, old with no food, middle age free food, middle age no food, young free food, young no food. And the results would indicate free food affects learning ability only in people of a certain age. Well, again, this is a fantasy thing, but I hope you get the picture. So we say there's an interaction between the effects of free food and age. And we get a better understanding from an experiment like that as to how this manipulation works. Hope that made sense. It's complicated. It's not easy, but that's the way science is. So we apply this to behavior, which is actually what we've just been doing, and it can be done in any way, any form or fashion, as long as it's ethically acceptable and you follow the guidelines that are in place to protect people. So there you are. All right, be seeing you soon.